The opposition leader says this might be the safest passage back to normal life, and he joins us live now, the New South Wales opposition leader, Chris Minns. Before we get to that, can I ask you about this so-called national plan and the comments, particularly from Anastasia Palaszczuk in recent days? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, look, sure, I understand the Queensland government is focused on making sure COVID doesn't infect their state. I wouldn't wish the last 10 weeks in New South Wales on anybody. It's been very challenging, but we're in a different situation in New South Wales. 10 weeks in lockdown, we need hope. We need to base our decisions on the Doherty Institute model, and people, particularly in Western Sydney, need to know that the marathon will end, not that we're going to add another 20 kilometres on the finish line.
Indeed. What's Anastasia Palaszczuk saying? Is she essentially saying that Queensland just won't open? It'll be shut to New South Wales indefinitely?
Look, it's unclear. I don't know what model she's relying on in relation to that. And I understand that she's going to fiercely protect the interests of Queensland. Obviously, the focus in New South Wales is opening up our state first before we can think about interstate travel, but ultimately everybody in Australia is going to have to travel, and good communication between political leaders is going to be the key to that, Laura.
Indeed, it is. And the Doherty modelling, it's just a modelling, it's a forecast, but it's the best we've got at the moment. You know, Anastasia Palaszczuk says she's holding street stalls at the moment, so she seems to be getting, you know, pretty popular feedback. But can you really run a state based on, I guess, a minority of people that are probably happy to never leave their suburb again?
Look, I doubt that she's running the entire health model off community feedback. Community feedback's important. I mean, the situation in New South Wales is far more dire. And my point in the newspapers this morning and in our op-ed is that we can't say to the millions of people, look, you need to go out and get vaccinated. Vaccinations are the key to lifting restrictions and to have your freedoms back. Oh, but then when you do that, you listen to the government, you get the jab, we extend the deadline even longer. We need to start focusing on returning freedoms in New South Wales, because the impact on education, on business, on people's well-being and, community, sort of personal connections is being disconnected, and it's having a huge impact on Australia's largest state.
Tell me about the vaccine passport. How would it work in your mind?
Well, look, it's in operation in most of Europe. It's certainly in operation via the NHS in the UK and in many cities in the United States. And effectively, it would allow you to prove that you've been vaccinated. Now, there is a push in southern states in the US to ban vaccine passports and mandatory vaccinations for key workers and important industries, and regrettably it's being supported by some interests in New South Wales, even on the backbench of the New South Wales government. So I was making the point that we can't go through the last 10 weeks, tell everybody to get vaccinated, have some finally some hope at the end of this long tunnel, and then say, look, we're going to put you in a position where you'll go to work, somebody on your construction line or in your workplace decides not to get vaccinated, and you're at risk of A, being put in isolation for a couple of weeks, and B, being exposed to this deadly disease.
Chris, there's a lot of opposition to it, and it's, not just one typical group, if you like, but essentially we're needing a vaccine passport anyway. In New South Wales, if you're vaccinated, you get a couple of freedoms. You're allowed to hold a picnic in a couple of weeks' time. You need to show proof of your vaccination. So does this need to be formal, coordinated from the top? And who polices it? Because businesses are quite worried about this.
Businesses are, and I mean, this is the point I've been making. The whole health response, certainly over the last 8 of the 10 weeks, has been on vaccinations. Since everybody agreed that we're not going to get to COVID zero in New South Wales, that the disease has skipped quarantine lines and is in the community, the public health response has been on vaccinations. So our response going forward needs to be predicated on that. Now, that means that people need to prove that they've been vaccinated. They can have freedoms restored to them after going through the difficult last 10 weeks. And I'm concerned, particularly as Service New South Wales has been responsible in our state, in New South Wales, for payments to businesses, for permits for essential workers, and most of them have been, frankly, screwed up. I want the work to be done now. This is a bit of an early warning for the New South Wales government. Do the work now, outlay the plan for the future so that we can get it right when we hit those key vaccine milestones identified in the Doherty Institute report.
Well, that's fair enough too, because there have been a few hiccups along the way, but you're right, we've got plenty of warning now. Should it still be done through Service New South Wales? Do you think that's the best mechanism, or Medicare? What is it?
Look, Medicare linked to service New South Wales is probably the model they'll adopt in New South Wales. I mean, look, we're open to the best model that is easily accessible for millions of people. If that's Service New South Wales, that's great. But look, they've got to get on top of it, because essential work that they were responsible for over the last couple of months has not gone well. And the key work needs to be done now, because we've seen, certainly in European Union and the NHS that's rolling out the UK model, that it's quite complicated, and it needs to be universally trusted and a system that is easily identifiable so it can be used on a massive scale.
Chris Minns, good idea. Thanks so much. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Laura.